Thank you, everyone, for joining this morning. Excited to have you here, excited to have you listen in and encourage others to follow up after today's call and go in and watch the recording. Many of your chorus mates, those that have missed it, just remind them that this will be available probably by Monday on the Region 16 website under resources. I'd like to start off by introducing our team leader who has been influential to get this organized, along with our guest speaker, Thérèse, who she will introduce. But first, Sue Melvin, would you take the lead and do a little housekeeping as well? Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks, Suzanne. We really appreciate it. And more so, the entire RMT greatly appreciates your time this morning, everybody, for this very important topic. And we know you have a lot of Zooms that you're invited to and a lot of other things you could be doing. So thank you so much for making this a priority. I'm going to start with, as Suzanne mentioned, some housekeeping items. So give me 1 second and I will share screen. Very brief. Oh, let's see if we can find that button for slideshow. Here we go. Welcome to Diversity and Inclusion. All attendees are muted due to the number. We are able to unmute you if needed during the call. But everybody is centrally muted at this point, only to keep everything moving and have as little background noise as we can. So thanks for understanding. So in the chat, if you do have a question for us, for the guest faculty and presenter, please try to remember to precede it with the word question. That helps us determine that it's not just saying hello and social type of chats. So precede your question with the word question, if you would. We are recording this. Let me move my toolbar here. We are recording this class, and we thought we would let you know that. There is a portion in the last third where some individuals will be sharing a story of their own, at which point we will pause the recording in the interest of privacy. But we wanted to let you know this is being recorded. And near the end of the class, we're going to put a link in the chat to our survey. Some of you who have attended Suzanne's monthly education classes before know that we try to keep this short and sweet, so it literally takes you 2 minutes to complete it. We would appreciate if you complete that survey before you leave, because we all know out of sight, out of mind. So take a couple minutes and we'll put that near the end of the class in the survey. And thank you all so much again. It is my pleasure to introduce our regional management team. We talked about this at our last team meeting, and we all feel that this topic of diversity and inclusion, not just in Sweet Adelines, but in the world, is so very important right now that we all wanted to be here. And so I'd like to welcome our regional management team. First off, Jackie Barron, our communications coordinator. Christina's going to find her somewhere. There she is. Good morning, Jackie. Joan Borden, our directors coordinator. Good morning, Joan. Martha DeClerc, marketing coordinator. Ooh, Martha's in the forest. How cool. Suzanne McKinley, who you've already met, our illustrious education coordinator. Good morning. Myself as the team coordinator, Colleen O'Dwyer, our finance coordinator. And last but not least, Christine York, our membership coordinator. So good morning, and thank you, RMT, for getting up early and having your coffee and making sure that you were on here. We really appreciate it. Thank you. So going forward, we have our guest faculty who we would like to introduce. This lady's Sweet Adeline journey has been one of variety and adventure. She has been a member of 8 different choruses, not all at the same time, in 5 Canadian provinces and 1 American state. and in 5 different regions. At the chorus level, she has served in leadership positions like events coordinator, education faculty at the regional level, and on international task forces, committees, and the International Board of Directors. She is currently the leader of the Diversity Inclusion Task Force for Sweet Adelines and is our president, our international president-elect. Thérèse makes her home in Toronto, Ontario, and is honored to be a member of both Lake Ontario Region 16 and North Metro Chorus. She has 2 grown daughters, one actor and one nurse, and lives on her own now with her cactus named Squishy. Good morning, Thérèse.
Good morning, Sue. Thank you for that introduction. And welcome everyone to our discussion about diversity and inclusion. I'm very excited, first, that the entire RMT is here. That's wonderful. Region 16 has such a committed RMT, and this is just another example of that. So that's wonderful. And then to see so many participants is also very exciting. So I'm hoping that this will be a highly interactive and interesting educational opportunity for you. So as Sue mentioned, put your questions in the chat box, and she's going to monitor that for me. And Sue, I'll let you know, I will stop for questions at certain times, but if you have a question come up during my presentation, feel free to interrupt me at a moment where, you know, that makes sense, and I'll answer as we're going through as well, so that we keep everything relevant.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I do have a presentation that we'll be walking through, and I will share that right now. Can you see that, everyone?
Yes.
Excellent. So Lake Ontario, Region 16, let's talk about diversity and inclusion. This is our logo for the Diversity and Inclusivity Task Force in Sweet Adelines, and we'll be taking it forward, removing the task force name and just having it be our overall diversity and inclusion logo. So you'll see it in the future on presentations, and we're hoping to get a button made, things like that. So just introducing you to that today as well. So what are we going to talk about today? The first thing we're going to talk about is the Chorus Toolkit. So I'm going to introduce you to the components of the toolkit, talk to you about what the current status is, and a little bit about what the future plans are. And then we're also going to be talking about the song assessment tool. So we'll talk a little bit about its evolution. We'll talk about the process right now and answer any specific questions about the song assessment tool that you have. And then we're going to move on to talking about storytelling and how that influences what we're doing. So it's a big part of how we can move forward with diversity and inclusion, and we'll talk about that later in the presentation. And then we'll have a wrap up with an opportunity for questions and any follow-up activities. Okay. So let's get started with the Chorus Toolkit. The Chorus Toolkit is a product of the Diversity, Inclusivity Task Force of Sweet Adelines, and we have been working on it now, probably the Chorus Toolkit about 2 years. And so we've developed components of it. That's the first thing I'd like to introduce you to, are the components. So there will be resources about getting started in your chorus with diversity activities. We're going to talk about the art of conversation, so important in the topic of diversity and inclusion, especially when it comes to the inclusion and equity portions. We're going to talk about chorus choices in that toolkit as well. So what choices, when you're making choices for your chorus, the things to consider. Marketing and recruitment tools to attract a more inclusive and diverse audience. There'll be a glossary. Also the history, so these are reference documents that will be included so that we understand the language we're speaking together, and also the importance of that, the Sweet Adelines history in this topic. So as you may have noticed, we did talk about rolling this out in October, and that didn't happen, and there are a lot of reasons for that. So I'm going to share with you why we have delayed it. The first was the pilot lessons learned. We did have a pilot with the Chorus Toolkit, and in that pilot, we learned certain lessons that led us to delay. Also, we looked at change management practices for diversity and inclusion. And that also informed a bit of a delay. And then also, because we're dealing with COVID-19, we looked at some change management principles for COVID-19 as well. And all of those things led us to the decision to delay the rollout of the toolkit for the time being. So I want to talk about those pilot lessons learned. One of the primary lessons we learned is that the why is not clear enough across the organization. So there's not an understanding of the awareness of the why we're doing this, what is the purpose of this, what's the scope of it, those type of things. And so that's very, very important as a foundational criteria to look for success. And again, and then the next thing we looked at was the contents of the toolkit are substantial. So yeah, they're more likely to be rolled out successfully if we apply a staged and strategic rollout. So when we looked at the final product, it's wonderful, but there is a lot. There's a lot there, and it's been developed. We're all very familiar. People on the task force are all very familiar. We've been immersed in this, but we recognize that the whole organization has not been immersed. And so we've been through the first steps where a lot of the organization has not. And it's very important to recognize that there are steps to this process. And then the third thing that came through very clearly in the pilot was that chorus leadership support, both musical and administrative, is critical for the adoption of the toolkit. So this is something we realized we need to take a step back and work some more with leadership. And so those were the primary drivers of delaying the rollout. So here are some of the lessons we learned from looking at change management for diversity and inclusion. You cannot fast forward to belonging. You have to go through the hard work of creating the inclusive culture so you can get to the belonging. So in order to have a truly diverse and particularly equitable organization, we do need to go through that creation of the inclusive culture. A one-size-fits-all approach is not effective. So we have to be open to trying new things and make sure that we share our success stories. This again is different people, different choruses, different parts of the organization are at different stages in their diversity and inclusion journey. And it's very important that we recognize that again so that we can successfully roll this out. And then lasting change must activate different parts of the system, top down, bottom up, and middle out. And everyone must understand that they have a role. So again, we want to do a little bit more focus on rolling out through all of those levels with the toolkit. Then we looked at some of the issues for change management in the COVID-19 paradigm. And one of the things that came across was you have to focus on priorities. You have to make the changes that have the most impact and communicate the compelling reasons for them. And here again, those compelling reasons for us, that's that why. We need to get the why understood, okay? And make sure that we get the most important parts of the toolkit out in the earliest days. Be cognizant of change saturation. Right now, people are dealing with a lot of change, changes that COVID-19 has forced upon us. We talked about Toronto going again to the lockdown. Even within the COVID-19, there's changes intermittently. And so the thing about change saturation is when people have absorbed as much change as they can, it can actually create a barrier to changes that they might have been receptive to if they weren't dealing with that saturation. So this did enter into our rollout, particularly in the lead up to the US election. We recognized that October was probably going to be a difficult time for the rollout of the toolkit based on what our American members, which are a large percentage of our members, of course, we're dealing with in terms of the uncertainty of their election and everything else going on at that time. So that was an example of where we recognized that there was a change saturation happening. And then recognizing the factor of the what do I have to lose, which is always a factor in change management, has a stronger weight than ever right now because people perceive that they have already lost so much due to COVID-19. So, particularly for us, the ability to get together and sing together is a big loss for us in the organization. And so we just need to recognize that when we're putting further change in that might have a perception that something is going to be lost. Okay. So what now? We are going to continue the pilot. We're going to make it a little more focused, structured, and specific. And we're going to have more direct and personal support from the diversity task force. So those choruses continuing in the pilot will have a specific contact on the task force. They'll be asked to do very specific tasks rather than we kind of gave some choices, out of these 3 things, try something. We're going to be a little more focused with that. We're going to provide them messages to share with their choruses. That was another one of the lessons that came across, is that people were unsure what they should be saying. Chorus members weren't hearing messages. So we're going to give a little more support in those areas. We're going to prioritize the toolkit components and create a roadmap. So this is where we're going to look at that staged rollout, getting the most important aspects out first. And for some things, there may be, part of a component that gets rolled out initially, and then more gets rolled out at a later date. So we're looking at that staged rollout to keep things in digestible bites, so to speak. And then we're going to have support teams in place from the diversity task force to enable progress to continue. So for those choruses who have started along the road and perhaps are a little further on in their journey and want to be doing maybe a little bit more advanced work in this area, we are going to provide support to them so that they're not stalled because we haven't released the toolkit. So we want to make sure things keep moving forward while we delay the rollout of the toolkit. So we're going to there will be a communication to the entire organization. So you're getting a little bit of a sneak peek, approved by Joan Boudelier, international president. I spoke with her, and we did not feel that these were confidential, important. As a matter of fact, it's important for people to understand. So these are things that have been approved for me to share with you, but there will be an organizational wide communication. As a matter of fact, multiple communications coming out with more detail to what all of these things will mean. Okay. And then I just wanted to share just a couple of toolkit teasers here. The first is one called Project Implicit. And what this is they're surveys that you take yourself just to try to determine if you have any implicit biases, which are the unconscious biases. And so there's 2 connections here, 2 links here. One, this is the original Harvard link, which is on an American site, and then there is a Canadian one as well. I think the only reason for this was to, follow the laws of each country to make sure that the messages fit the organization. So this, as you can see, it's Harvard that is behind this, and it's just a series of tests that you can take of various different diversity groups. There's gender, there's race, religion. So you can go through the multiple groups, and it's just for yourself. You'll just see for yourself if there's any implicit or unconscious biases that you have. And the reality is we all have them. It's part of the brain's natural function to protect the organism that we have these. So as you become aware of them, then you can take steps to manage them if you know what those biases are. So that's just this will be included in the toolkit, but it's something that as individuals you're able to access. And the second one is liberating structures. And I'm going to see if I can share this with you. I do have it queued up on my Chrome Explorer. So I'm just going to see if it will let me share that with you, because I would like to show you this one. This is a wonderful tool that's available for if you want to do some work in your chorus or your group. Not showing up on my select. All right, give me just a moment because I do want to find that to share. There it is, liberating structures. Okay. Apologize for the delay. Close that? There it is. Okay, sorry about that. So liberating structures is a little bit of a toolkit on its own, and you can see there's a menu here. And what is in that menu are all kinds of tools for having conversations, you know, different, we've used the Conversation Cafe. That was what we used for our first diversity workshop at International. This heard, seen, and respected. The exercise we're going to do today is modeled on this. This exercise is meant to be done in person, but I've modeled it for our session today. So if you're interested in, you know, working in your group and kind of looking at some exercises that you can do to increase awareness or find out how people feel, there's some excellent tools on this website. So I just wanted to share that with you. And I'll go back to my presentation. Okay, so that's an example of the type of resources that will be available in the course toolkit. Okay, are there any questions? Sue, anything in the chat about the course toolkit before we move on?
Nothing yet.
Okay, if something does come up, let me know. We can certainly come back to this. I know sometimes it takes people a couple of minutes to type, so
Will do.
we'll move forward. Okay. So now I want to talk about the song assessment tool. And the first thing that's important in the song assessment tool is to talk about the evolution. So in our chorus toolkit, this was developed originally as a piece of the chorus toolkit, and it fell under the chorus choices component. And within that component, we were working on repertoire selection. As part of that, we developed the song assessment tool. And it's really important to understand that this was the origin of the tool. It was not built to support the rule that came out. It was built as a part of the chorus toolkit, and its focus was education. So the idea was that it would help members gain an understanding of diversity dimensions and how they relate to songs that they're choosing for their repertoires, and then to help performers make more informed choices about their repertoire. So those were the primary goals of the song assessment tool when it was first developed. Then, of course, came our iBot announcement in June. And when they looked at the rule that they were looking at putting in place, the song assessment tool was a perfect fit to help inform that rule. So in that capacity, it would help members determine the admissibility of a song from the international perspective, and it will help the judging panel support the rule change. So they're not going to be faced with having to make a decision in the pit about whether a song is admissible or not. That will have already been determined through the tool. But the one thing that we feel really strongly about on the task force is that the primary goal of this tool is still education. So its biggest value is in helping our members understand the history, the background, what the lyrics in songs mean, and then helping them to make decisions for their repertoire according to that.
Thérèse, we do have a question, but perhaps you just haven't gotten to it yet, and that, if so, that's fine. Will participation in the chorus toolkit be mandatory for Sweet Adeline choruses? And if so, how will the participation be measured and assessed?
So it will not be mandatory. There won't be a tracking of, you know, if you're not using the chorus toolkit, there's not going to be any ramifications. So it is a voluntary participation, and that's why having that change management, doing the right change management is even more important, because we have to give our choruses compelling reasons to participate. The second part of that question is an excellent one, because it's part of the reason that it is difficult, particularly in an organization like ours, to make anything mandatory, is because measuring is almost impossible. So we will have, for choruses participating with the toolkit, there will be, shared Facebook pages where they can share resources, where they can speak to each other, and those will be based on being involved in the course toolkit. So there will be some initial steps for a course to take to then gain entry to that shared resource. So, but it will not be mandatory. So in terms of the measurement, as I said, there won't be a way to measure or to, look at a chorus and say they're not participating and what are we going to do about it? It is voluntary. That's a great
Thank you.
question. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to keep talking about the song assessment tool. So again, I'm going to try to go over to the website, the Sweet Adelines website. If I'm not successful, I do have some slides, but it'll be much better if I can share from the actual website. Back over to Zoom. Okay. I'm just going to go back here and see if I can get there from here. Are you seeing the Sweet Adelines page? Sue, can you tell me if you're seeing the Sweet Adelines page?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so on the home page, there is a link to diversity, equity, and inclusion, which takes us to a further page, our diversity, equity, and inclusion page, which has information and then resources. So we go to the resources section, and the course toolkit is a members only resource. So you do have to sign in. I'm already signed in, so it took me to that page. So we have the diversity, equity, inclusion member resources, and the song assessment tool components are all here. So you can look at the introduction, you can look at the initial message from Joan, our international president, and then here is the section you access the how it works section where you can actually access the tool itself. So there's a guide to getting started. You can look at the questions before you start the tool, which you will want to do that. Read through the questions before you actually start working with the tool. Then you input your answers into the song assessment tool. And the final thing you can do is view the song evaluation database, which will list the songs and their ratings. There are videos here. We're going to be taking these down because we are making some changes to the tool. And so we're going to be taking them down because they won't be they won't be accurate anymore when they're showing the tool as you're using it. We will replace them with a video that shows the tool with its changes. So, but this is how you get to the tool itself. Okay. Any questions about?
Just a question on something that was earlier about Project Implicit and
Sure.
liberating structures.
Yeah.
The question was whether there would be links or variations of the site for Canada and the US, or whether you're aware that it's just one site.
Liberating structures is just one site.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my.
One more question
Yep.
about, is the tool going to still be in the unsavable format? And why is it in this format?
So the reason it's in the format, I'll speak to that first, is because of the tool we're using. Right now we're using Google Docs. And so we are looking for a better tool. We've got some IT people looking at that for us to find a tool where we can do things like save, where we can do things like automatically send you an email that your submission has been accepted, where we can streamline our processes. Right now, they're fairly manual. So we can put a workflow in where, for example, right now, we're responding from the song assessment mailbox, whether your song has been approved or not. And so we have all of the work groups feeding into one person so that all gets processed. And what we'd like to do is eliminate that so that that person is will automatically be notified of songs that have been approved. They'll automatically be updated in the database. We're still in the process of looking for a tool that can do that for us. So if anybody has any ideas, or if anybody has a strong IT background and you'd like to help us find that tool, you can just send me an email. I would really appreciate hearing from you, because we are looking for another tool that allows us not just that part of it, which is saving it, that is a frustrating thing, but there's other things about it that we could certainly make it more user friendly and those type of things if we had a better tool. We had to escalate the rollout of this in order to support the board decision. So this was always meant to be an interim tool as we looked for something that has a little more robust in dealing with this. So as I said, if anybody has any ideas or would like to be part of that search, please let me know. Okay. Our plan is certainly to get it to that point. We know that that's a frustration for sure.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to the actual submission process and just walk through that with you. And again, if there are questions along the way, please just enter them in the chat and Sue will bring them to my attention. So of course, the first step is you submit your song through the song assessment tool. This goes to a staging database. So this is a database of submitted songs. This is not shared at this point. Again, we are looking for functionality where we would at least be able to tell people a song has been submitted, so that if you're thinking of submitting a song, it hasn't been rated yet, you would still be able to know it had been submitted. So that again is some functionality we're looking at adding. But at this point, that's not shared. That then goes to the Song Assessment Tool Committee. Now, right now, that it's work groups. Once the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council is in place, then this subcommittee will deal with these submissions. Right now, the work groups are dealing with them. The first thing they do is they check in that shared database to see if the song is already there and rated. And if it isn't, we'll go the no path first. They check for quality criteria. Now, this quality criteria is basically, is there enough data there and is it accurate so that they feel they can make an assessment on the song? So, are there enough resources? Is the quality of the source reliable? Those type of things. So they do a certain quality check before it gets put into the shared database. And if it isn't, we go back to the submitter and ask them for more, or to check the accuracy of their submission, and then they would go back into that submission process. We've actually had very few that have not met the quality criteria, so our members are doing a great job of working with the tool. Okay. If it is met, then they do they rate the admissibility for Sweet Adeline's performance. And there's a couple of key words here. The first is admissibility. So what this means is that we are not rating this song as to its goodness or badness or anything else based to the world. It really is restricted to Sweet Adelines. And what we're looking for, the reason we're using the word admissibility is because this is it admissible for a Sweet Adelines performer to perform this song? And that's what that admissibility speaks to. It does not speak to, is it suitable for this particular performer? Do you have young performers singing a song that's maybe too provocative for them? Or do you have someone singing a song that's the arrangement's too difficult for where they are? It does not speak to any of that. It speaks only to the admissibility and only based on racial or racist, actually, content, lyrics, messages, or history. So it's very specific. And then the other thing, again, is that it's restricted to Sweet Adeline's performance. So we are not saying that people cannot sing these songs. We are saying that they are not admissible in Sweet Adeline performances. So it's a very sort of restricted criteria there as to when we say admissible or not. And then that is stored in the shared database so that everyone is able to review it. We send the submitter an email to tell them about what the rating is either way. And then if the song is already in the database, there can be a few criteria here. if there's been new research added, and there can be a couple of reasons for that. One is if it's a different arranger. So each arrangement has to be reviewed. Again, we're looking at streamlining the tool to make that an easier process where all you would say is it's a new arrangement, and that would take you to the set of questions you need to answer rather than go through all of the research that's already in the database. You can challenge the rating on a song. So if we have something that we have rated as admissible and you believe it's inadmissible, you can submit new research to support that, and the work group will review again with that new research in mind and could potentially change the rating of the song. Similarly, if you see a song that's inadmissible and you can provide data and research evidence that we should be considering it admissible, you can challenge that as well. We think that is less likely that new research would change the admissibility, change it from inadmissible to admissible, but we're not presuming or assuming that that could never happen. So again, we're going to put a note or a checkbox in the tool to say, are you challenging an existing song? So that, again, what you have to add is your new research. You don't have to add all of the other, the original sheet music and things like that. So we're trying to refine it to the point where it's as streamlined as possible. So if there is new research, then we go back into the cycle for rating the admissibility, et cetera, and that admissibility could change.
Thérèse, there's a question in the chat about whether this is for any Sweet Adeline performance or for competition only.
It is for any Sweet Adeline performance. So there are questions on, and what's important about that is there are questions on the survey that aren't related to the racist component. So it asks about other groups. If there's a chance that this song could exclude other groups. The rating itself is to support the rule that the International Board put in place, which is related only to the racist components of a song. But the tool itself also asks you questions to consider about, is it suitable for your chorus? Do you have people in your chorus that will feel excluded if you sing this song, even if it's not based on a racist component? So there are questions in the toolkit or in the song assessment tool still, again, that help the submitter or the person evaluating the song to look at all those different components and to look at their own group, look at the audiences. You may even at some point look at a song and say, well, we're not going to sing this when we have this type of audience, but we might sing it. And an example of that might be a religious song where it's completely suitable to a certain audience, but not to another. And then again, your particular chorus may have a demographic in it where you would choose not to sing religious songs at all. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But those are the type of things where initially the tool, again, was designed so that the assessor would have that discretion as to whether their group performed that song or not. And so the assessment is related only to the racist components, but the song assessment tool is meant to be used for all Sweet Adeline performances.
So you touched on the next question. I think you've answered it, but the question was whether the tool would be used for objectionable lyrics from a racist perspective or sexist material.
Yes, so there is, as you work down in the tool, there are questions about gender, there's a number of groups listed. So that would be an example where, you might look at the song and say, no, this song we feel it's derogatory to women, so we're not going to sing it, those type of things. And that is at the discretion of the performer. Again, we are not addressing that in the rating of the song. We're only addressing the racist components. So you may choose, even though a song has an admissible rating, you may choose not to perform it for your group based on those other criteria, as you said, the sexist, that type of content. These are excellent questions.
Right. Another question, this is less involved with the tool than a general question. given the average member has very little input into musical selection, depending on the chorus, how do you suggest we actually make our voices heard without running for the management team or the music team?
That's an excellent question as well. And this is where I do feel like the chorus toolkit comes into place, where how, for both sides, how is it received by the management team? So the management team may talk about, here's a process by which members can raise those types of concerns. Because you're right, when it comes to the actual musical selection, typically most chorus members don't have input to that. So that's where the chorus needs to work on a process. If you don't have a process in place in your chorus, and you do want to raise those concerns, I would suggest that you speak to someone on your management team that you trust. You could take it to your section leader to get it escalated to the level where the management and music teams are looking at that as a question. So that's what I would suggest, is approach someone in a leadership position who can take that forward on your behalf, or include you in a conversation where you can speak to it yourself. If that process is not in place, one of the things, again, in the toolkit would be that, we need to define these processes for the choruses. The choruses need to define the process by which this feedback can be, the conversation can become two-way, and feedback can be provided in a way that is conducive to really listening to hearing what is being said. That's a great question.
Yes, that's very helpful answer as well. One more question. Why each arranger? The history of the song will be the same regardless of arranger.
Correct. And so there are a couple of reasons for it. Sometimes an arranger will add a tag or a bridge or a intro to a song. And we did have that happen actually with a recent song where the arranger added something that we would consider inadmissible to a perfectly admissible song. So that's why the other arranger. And so again, we're looking at the tool to find a way to say, the song is already in the tool, has already been approved as admissible. I'm just submitting another arrangement, and that would take you to a different part of the tool where you would simply submit the new arrangement, and you would address, you would signify if there are specific things being added, like a tag or a bridge or an intro. So we're trying to get that streamlined. And actually, I have been advising people that if it's an arrangement, you can just bypass those questions and go straight to anything that's different. Or if it's just a new arranger and they really haven't changed anything other than the arrangement, so it's the same words, same melody, nothing new added, you can actually state that in your submission as well. But that is why we ask for different arrangers, because arrangers can change things in songs then. And in this one case, we did have inadmissible lyrics in particular added to the original song.
That makes sense. And speaking of changing things, the question that we talked about before this class is being reiterated in the chat. What about if certain words are changed in a song? For example, replace sisters with everybody.
That's an excellent question. And actually, we're going to be putting out in our next communication, we're going to be putting out some frequently asked questions, and that will be one of them. Changing words to become more inclusive, those type of things, gender words, things like that, or adding your quartet's name to a song or your chorus's name to a song with a little spoken something like that you've added. Those we don't need to see. What we are asking is if you are doing a parody where you've changed a whole section of words, or you're taking the song in a different direction. So we are asking that parody lyrics be submitted, but those will not be included in the shared database because they're so specific to that performer. But we do want to see if a song is being parodied to make sure that, again, we're not introducing those racist components with the parody. But if you are adding, as I said, if you're putting more inclusive words in, changing words to be more current, where a word had a different meaning a while ago and it just has a different meaning now, with the current, being a more current word that more audiences would understand, those type of word changes don't need to be submitted. and certainly not words that are going to make it more inclusive. The one thing I do want to state, though, is if a song is inadmissible, if the original song is inadmissible, lyric changes cannot make it admissible. So you can't take an inadmissible song and change the lyrics to make it admissible. And part of the reason for that is these songs have a history. And we saw it happen with the song last year, actually, where somebody parodied a song that the song is so familiar, the melody of the song is so familiar that the original song is in people's minds. And so even using it for a parody is, or changing those words does not change the history of that song. Now, if it was something where it was very, very obscure and nobody knew the original lyrics, there's a couple where we've said that, you know, it was used by one person in a different way. We really are sticking to the original song. So I do want to stress that if the song is inadmissible, do not, you know, don't think that you can change the words and make it admissible. But certainly if you're doing small word changes, we don't need to have that resubmitted to the database. Excellent question.
Right. So someone's just asking for additional clarification, just
Yep.
to make sure she's got it right. So right now she's thinking that the song assessment for contest is based on removing racist content or material. And the song assessment tool can be used as a resource to guide song choices in general.
Yes, that's an excellent summary. Whoever submitted that, that's very, very good. That's exactly what the situation is.
Okay.
And
good.
again, we built it originally for that first purpose, for choruses to look at, do we want to sing the song? Do we want the song in our repertoire? Do we want to sing it for this particular audience? And then it got borrowed because it was such a great fit for supporting the rule. I mean, all of the research is what you would do to support that rule. So excellent.
That sounds good. One more question
Sure.
about whether Sweet Adelines has a timeline for expanding official assessment beyond just racism, for example, gender, sexism, etc.
No, that is not on the horizon at all. So I think for myself, what would change that is if we did another rule change. But no, the assessment itself, the rating itself is based on the racist, and it is to support our denouncement of racist songs. So no,
Right.
there is not. There is not.
Right. So something like, quote, is suggestive material
Correct.
would be up to choruses like it is now to monitor.
Exactly. Yeah, we really want to respect the autonomy of our choruses, and really the assessment is meant to support the entire process. It's meant to keep an inadmissible song off the contest stage, so that if you are at a Sweet Adelines event, especially one sanctioned by international, that you will not be hearing those songs with the racist content. It's also been expanded to our international faculty. So if they're, you know, doing classes, for them to be aware of the resources they use in those classes. So it's really from the international perspective that what that desire is.
Great. One more on the database itself, and perhaps we just are getting ahead of ourselves, I don't know. Does the database have an explanation of what made it inadmissible so that it could also be used as a learning or understanding tool?
We actually, it was interesting because we had a meeting of the toolkit, the working groups last night. And that was one of the things we talked about is there some way that we could do a quick summary? I mean, the data is there in the assessment. If you look through the research, you will see the reasons yourself. And I would recommend that if you do see a song rated as inadmissible, that, well, even if you see it as admissible, they're great learning tools. You know, part of the value as well is even just in being more expressive in how we sing, understanding better the meanings beyond inclusion and diversity. It's good to understand those songs. So I would recommend really reading the research. If you see a song that's inadmissible, you are going to see why in the research. You know, that they'll talk about the language that was used, if there's a term that was used in the song that meant something at a certain time, if the song was performed, you know, the most famous performances of it were done in blackface or something like that, you will see the support for that in the research. And I would recommend that you look at the research. But the work group did bring that up, is that maybe there's some way we could put, especially on the ones that are not clearly obvious, right? That where you might look at it and say, I really can't see why this song would be inadmissible, that we maybe could add a comment to strengthen the evidence. So that is something the work group is looking at as a possibility. But for right now, I would say if you see that song as a no and you want to know why, look at the research that's attached. The link to all of the research is included in the database. So you can go in and see the evidence right there.
Thank you. And if I may add really quick, I used the tool when it first came out and put a song through. And I just have to say, it was a fascinating bit of detective work. I found so much out about this song that now whenever it's introduced at a performance, I have so much more interesting information to give the audience in small bits, of course, about that song.
Yeah, that's why I say it's the value of it goes beyond even admissibility or should we sing it. It gets into, wow, there's a certain story that's already built in here, and you know it can build an emotional attachment in your chorus. So many of our higher level performing groups have been doing this for quite some time. Have been doing this type of research for quite some time. But even some of the people, particularly in the work groups, excuse me, have said that this has been a great educational experience for them. Like they had no idea about some of the history of these songs or the history of songs in general. And so it's been a great learning experience for even the people who were already doing this type of work.
Just quickly, you know, it's more of a comment really, but that when some of these songs were written, they perhaps were not seen as racist at that time. And then as we look back in history and what we recognize now, of course they are.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, if we go to an example that I think most people, most of our members, not all, but most of our members are in agreement with, let's look at the Mammy songs, when those songs were written from a perspective of very positive, that the Mammy experience was very positive, which for some people it was, right? And so that's a great example of, at that time, that was acceptable and seen to be even a good thing, to, you know, talking about that good relationship. Whereas looking back now and understanding what the history truly is, we recognize the, you know, inequity that was going on, and the you know, the diminishment and demeanment of those the mammies. So that's a great example of that, where it was perfectly acceptable in the time it was written.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Anything else before we move on? All great questions. Okay. So I do want to explore one of the toolkit components. So we're going to do a bit of an exercise here, and it's the art of conversation is the part of the toolkit that I want to explore this morning. And we're going to talk about the importance of stories. And as we talk about this now, those of you who know me well will be probably quite shocked that we haven't talked about the brain yet. So of course I have to bring the brain into the presentation. So I want to talk about what storytelling does for the brain. Storytelling is such an important part at the beginning of conversations as we begin the conversation process. And so here are some of the reasons that storytelling is such a good way of learning and empathizing and understanding others. So the first is what's called neural coupling. And neural coupling is the process by which parts of our brains are activated that actually allow us to turn the story we're hearing into our own ideas and experience. So our brains are not really skilled at differentiating reality from fantasy, reality from what is not real. That's why the process of visioning works so well, as we can convince our brains that we're already achieving things that we aren't. And this neural coupling is how that can work with others. If they're telling us our story, their story, we can actually allow that to become our own, a part of our own ideas and experiences. Okay, that's the first concept. The second is mirroring. So this is very similar to neurocoupling. It's the brain function that makes us respond as if we are living an experience that we're observing. And this is why, we cry at movies and things like that, is because what the person that we're watching or listening to is experiencing, we mirror it. There are actually mirror neurons in the brain that make us mirror what another person is doing or saying or experiencing. And it's seen throughout the animal kingdom. It's quite fascinating. Okay, at least to me. And then dopamine. The release of dopamine in response to emotionally charged stimulus promotes accuracy and longevity in memory. So if you hear somebody telling a story with emotion about something that's really important to them, it can lodge in your memory with that connotation. You understand and remember it. And one of the things that I really like about this is the accuracy piece. It actually promotes the accuracy in your memory as well. So it's a part that can be very conducive to learning. And then cortex activity. So when processing facts, only two areas of the brain are activated, and that's Wernicke and Broca areas. A well-told story engages many additional areas, and primarily the cortex. So the motor cortex, the sensory cortex, the frontal cortex, our thinking executive center, those are engaged when we're hearing a well-told story. So people's stories can impact us in a different way than just knowing about the facts. So if we hear, for example, if you hear statistics, if we're looking at, for example, in Canada, if we look at our Indigenous people, and we have a very large proportion of our people in prisons come from our Indigenous population. So I can tell you that. But if you hear the story of a person who is imprisoned and their life story of how that happened, that's going to have a very different impact on you than me just telling you those facts. So it's a very powerful way of understanding others rather than having the impersonal statistics or facts that are related. Any questions about any of these functions of the brain and how they're activated?
No, but we have a couple back on the prior topic about
Okay,
this.
that's fine.
Is
Yep.
that all right?
Yes.
Asking if there's a list about the song assessment tool,
Mhm.
a list of samples of websites that work for the research.
Yes, actually, when you first go into the tool, there's a list of resources there. You can link to there's a link to a list of resources, and it's quite extensive. So it shows you, resources that are great for looking for original music, that are really good for looking at the meaning of lyrics, those type of things. Even some about how music history affects the music and things like that. So there is a long list, and it's just as you go into the tool, right at the top, there's a link to those resources.
That's great. Another thing, how far do we go with investigating a lyricist's behavior? So for example, if the song is innocent or appears innocent enough, but we find out later that the lyricist was a racist, do we throw out the song, or what's the...
Yeah, our inclination has been to assess each song individually. If you had an extreme example where perhaps every other song that person wrote was racist, that might enter into it, but we assess the song on its own merits. So we have not put anything as inadmissible because of the composer or the lyricist exclusively. it has been the song itself. Now, sometimes iconic performances of it, especially original performances of the song, and that's where for example, the topic of blackface comes in, where the original performances of the song were done as a part of a cultural thing that was demeaning to a race. So that might be where the song itself might look okay, but its associated performances would carry that with them. So, but in terms of the composer or the lyricists themselves, we have not assessed anything as not admissible based on that. And it would, if without anything else, I don't think that we would. It might inform a chorus's choices about that. I mean, a chorus could certainly take that approach, but it will not affect the admissibility in and of itself. Another great question.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Anything else about our storytelling? So we're going to try this out. We're going to give this a little experiment here, and we're going to start with the framework of this exercise. So the point of this exercise is to listen and to allow yourself to fully experience the story. So we're not going to try to give advice to the storyteller. We're not going to make any judgments on the storyteller. The storyteller is going to tell their story. We are going to listen, and we may talk about what that experience of listening was as part of the exercise, but the story itself, there won't be a challenge to the story. There won't be any of that, or you shouldn't have felt that way, or that was a dumb thing to do. Those type of things. We're going to stick to listening to the story. And here's a little principle that we can apply. So it's the SITS principle, which is stay in the story. Work to resist framing a response or judgment, or thinking, well, here's what I would have done. So really, really try to sit in that listening mode and really hear the story. Allow your brain's natural functions to immerse yourself in someone else's experience. So we just want to really listen to these stories. This is such a key component of the beginning of having conversations. So we're just going to play with this a little bit. So our first topic, we're going to do a couple topics. And the first one is what I experienced in school. So is there anyone who, and this can be a positive experience, a negative experience, it's just a story of something you experienced in school. It can be a single story. It can be in general what I experienced on high school, whatever story you want to tell.